Let me know if this sounds familiar at all. You've been learning piano for a few months and you've kind of kept it separate from your music making until you get good enough at piano to be able to use it to make music. Then one day you're making music and you've made a sick drum track and you're like, fuck, I need some chords, but I don't really want to sample anymore because I've been practicing piano. How hard could this be? You see the keyboard in the corner of your eye, you move towards it, your hands descend upon the keys, and bullshit. Hang on. Chords were a little bit ambitious for the first time. Let's just try a quick melody in the right hand. Bullshit. Everything you do sounds terrible. You have no idea where to start, and you end up deciding, fuck it, this whole piano thing, it's gonna take years, and you quit. That was me every 3 months for like 3 or 4 years. And one of my favorite producer YouTubers just committed to learning the piano, and I can see this becoming him if he's not careful. And it's not because we just need to work a bit harder.
Merry fucking Christmas!
It's simply because the traditional techniques used to learn piano are great for people who want to learn to play other people's songs, but absolutely terrible for people who want to learn to make their own. For that, we need something different, and I think I found it. This is Bob. He's been playing piano for 15 years, and he sounds like this. Now, by contrast, about the most impressive thing that I can play is this. Now, to be fair to myself, I've only been learning piano on and off for a few years, but I don't think that's the biggest difference between us. If you asked Bob to write a song on the piano, he'd probably shit himself. But if you instead asked him to learn this, he could probably do that in a couple hours. Now, if you gave me a week to learn that, I don't even think I'd be able to do it. But it only took me a few hours to write this. And this. And this.
Look at all the time you wasted writing your
And that's just down to exactly how we learn to play the piano. Bob's classically trained, which means that every bit of effort he put in every week for like 10 plus years was all going towards the goal of playing really difficult pieces written by great composers really, really well. And I did the exact same thing. I learned violin for 10 years, but despite 10 years of practice, I can't write a melody on my violin for shit. When I want a string part, I literally write it on piano, then I'll go get my violin and record it in later. Now, since 90% of people just want to learn how to play their favorite songs, 90% of tutorials are just going to teach that skill set. It explains why it's so easy for people like us to get lost in the sea of tutorials, learning things that we don't even need. It explains why it's so easy for people like us to quit after a few months because we're just not getting what we need out of these tutorials.
I've tried learning keys in the past. You know, I went and got a little course online, followed it for a week or two, and then I gave up.
Now, I would love to be able to play as well as Bob can. I really would, but if I could only choose one, I know what's more important to me. What's more important to me is being able to sit down and write the chords which fit perfectly with that drum loop that I've made, or to sit down and capture a feeling of nostalgia that I have, or to sit down and listen to a Frank Ocean song, hear the chords, understand why they work, and then transplant it into my music. In my opinion, most of the battle as an artist is knowing what to play, and if we never develop the skill, we're going to sit down at the piano with all the piano chops in the world and have no idea what to play. And somehow we still expect to, even though all we've ever done is listen to someone else who tells us what notes to play. And to do that, we need a methodology that's going to teach us the language of music, not just how to read out something someone else has written, but fuck me, a methodology that teaches language and syntax and all the technical shit. That's got to sound technical and super soul crushing, right? Actually, no. No, it doesn't. It's jazz. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh my god, I've heard jazz is super difficult. I'm never going to be able to play that. Relax. I'm not a jazz musician. What I'm going to talk about is the absolute basics. It's all I've needed to make the best music I've ever made. If you weren't thinking that, you were probably thinking, Seb, I like pop music, I fucking hate jazz. Relax. In the same way you can divide classical music and classical training as like a method for learning an instrument, we're going to divide the sound of jazz and the jazz methodology and way of learning an instrument into two separate things. The method is what we are going to focus on. Now, why is the jazz method the solution to all my problems? Well, before jazz was invented in the late 19th century, pretty much the only way to learn an instrument was through classical training, which had one clear goal: get good enough to be able to read and play the stuff that old dead white guys had written hundreds of years ago. The musician was just the vessel through which the composer was heard. And it kind of mirrored the times. Like, this was the time of kings and queens and shit. Like, you were just an atom in the world of a monarch, and as a musician, an atom in the world of a composer. Fast forward to when jazz came out, and it wasn't just the sound of it that caused riots, it was the fact that the musicians were literally making shit up as they went, and not relying on what composers had written. Not to mention that it was black people making this awesome music. Since the musicians understood the language of what they were playing, they didn't have to rely on the composers. And for the first time in Western music history, the musicians were the composers. Now, this is perfect for us producers and artists because it means that we don't need to reinvent the wheel when we're trying to learn the piano. We can just take the basic foundations of the jazz method and apply it to any type of music that we like. It can help us understand why the chords and melodies in a specific genre or from a specific artist sound the way they do, and then help us to write stuff like that. There's an entire side of YouTube with musicians who talk about this shit all the time, but I think one of the reasons that the producers have a lot of the time never heard of this is because everyone's so petrified of music theory. And spoilers, if you want to make it to the promised land, you're gonna have to learn some music theory. Okay, so if the first half of this video was to try and convince you of this approach, I want the second half to be to try and clarify what it actually looks like by showing you the skills that you'll want to work towards in this approach. They'll take a while to master, but as soon as you get on the path towards developing them, I think you'll approach music completely differently. I want you to kind of treat this video like a glossary of like where you want to get to and then find resources around it to get you there. Just quickly, I'm not a piano teacher and I'm not going to teach you piano. This is just the approach that's helped an artist and producer make the best music of his life. All right, let's do it. Part 0, foundations. I'm not even going to call it part 1 because these are foundational and you're probably going to learn them anyway and you can't skip them, so let's get straight in. So I'm going to split it into 2 parts. You got your basic piano skills and then you've got your basic music theory. For basic piano skills, these are basically the things that you were going to learn anyway from Pianote or like a beginner piano course. You should be comfortable doing things like playing a major scale in a few different keys, playing the triads in each of those keys, maybe with a bass note in the left hand, and then maybe a few inversions and maybe even a couple of little basic songs. Basically what I'm saying is I want you to get to a point where you've been at the piano for a few weeks or a few months and it doesn't feel completely foreign to you. Now, as for the basic music theory stuff, people tend to skip it, and you can kind of get away with that if you're just going to play other people's songs, but if you want to make your own, you just can't. End of story. I'll link Andrew Huang's 30-minute video where he goes over all the basic stuff for music theory. That's pretty much got everything, but I just want to highlight 3 key areas that I think are most important for us going forward. The first one's the major scale. It's the most basic thing in music and everything builds off it, so you need to understand it at a pretty good level. So things like scale degrees, the distance between each of the scale degrees, and then, for example, if I asked you like what scale starts on the 6th scale degree, you would need to instantly be able to answer that pretty easily. The second one is the diatonic triads in the major scale. So that's just basically knowing what quality each chord is at each different scale degree. So that'd be major, minor, or half diminished. And you probably want to know why. So the third one is slightly optional, but once you get to the first actual skill in this video, you're probably going to need it anyway. And that's basic functional harmony. And what I mean by that is just knowing what each of the different chords from the different scale degrees, what they feel like and where they generally want to pull. So for example, this is a little bit crude, but knowing that the 5 chord pretty much always wants to pull to the 1 chord, or knowing that the 6 chord feels like an alternative home to the 1 chord, just slightly sadder and like minor. Obviously, huge generalizations, but you get the idea. Now, I might have said a lot of words that you have no idea what they mean, and that's okay. This video and me saying those words is so that you can look them up and learn as you progress. So moving on from the basics, in my opinion, the traditional method of learning to play other people's songs requires 2 skills. First is piano dexterity, which is physically the ability to move your fingers where you want to move them. And then the second one is the ability to read. So knowing that this is supposed to sound like this. So if we instead want to be able to make our own music, we've got to remove that second skill and replace it with 2 new skills. The first skill allows us to listen and get ideas from other people's music, and the second skill allows us to use those ideas to make our own music. Let's turn this on actually. So I did this segment before, but I did it with a Billie Eilish song, the top song on the charts. And then realized that it's definitely copyrighted. So instead I've gone onto YouTube and found just the first no copyright music thing I could hear, and I have never heard it before. I'm gonna press play and we'll see if we can work out the chords.
Yeah. It's kind of funny it was that song, because I've heard that song before. I swear it's not copyright free, but we'll see, won't we?
So what I did there is just worked out the basic triads, but given a bit more time, I could probably do it with the melodies and more complex stuff. And there are people who are so much better at this than me, but I think that the basic triads and being able to do it like that is all you need to completely transform the way you make music. If you can identify what the different chord changes are in music you like, you can start to transplant that into your own music. And it's also a snowball effect. Like, as soon as you start being able to do this, every time you're listening to music, you'll be able to listen for those changes, and you'll just continually get better and better and better. And even if your actual piano playing is lagging behind, if you can hear what's going on in music that you like, you can still kind of do the same thing with MIDI. I just can't overstate how important of a skill this was for me to learn. In literally 5 years of making music, this was the single biggest paradigm shift I've ever had, and it only took me a few weeks to get started. I just didn't know it existed at the beginning. If you have no idea how to write a good chord progression, and I have no idea how anyone does it, you need this skill. If you can already understand some chord theory, but you hate the chord progressions you write, you need this skill. And if you are a whiz on the piano, can play incredible pieces, but still can't write for shit, you need this skill. Okay, so we've done some listening, we've got some cool musical ideas. How do we make something with it? So that doesn't sound very advanced, does it? But even with just that ability of improv, it's completely changed the way I make music, because if you literally turn on your record function for about 10 minutes, mess around on the keys and playing some chords or playing some melodies, you can chop up and find a couple of nice ideas and then extrapolate from there. And a lot of the time, you will never have been able to come up with those ideas without just flowing on the piano. Seriously hesitant to tell you how I do this because I'm not very good, and basic jazz improv lessons are probably a way better place to start. But basically all I'm trying to do there is hit chord tones, which means in my right hand I'm trying to hit a third, a fifth, or a seventh, or sometimes the root of whatever chord I'm playing in my left hand, or whatever chord is already being played by a backing track or something. After you've watched some of those basic tutorials, you could get started by using a jazz backing track, or you could go and find your favorite song, transcribe the chords because you've now got that skill, and then improvise over it with your right hand. You could also do the other way and then transcribe the melody and then improvise some chords underneath it, but that's slightly different as well. And if you start to improv even a little bit, you might just look up and realize, holy shit, this is exactly why I wanted to learn the piano in the first place. You're here, you just got to keep going. Now I get it, those are two really big skills and they can seem super scary right now, but if you've already committed to learning the piano, you've probably already accepted that it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort. All this is doing is shifting what you are focusing on during that effort. And at least for me, shifting focus towards these skills rather than just rote learning a bunch of songs has taken the exact same amount of effort, but it's completely changed the way that I make music. And because they're skills, it means that if you follow the traditional piano learning path, you're not just going to magically one day be good at them. You've got to have practiced them. So you might as well start now. So where does jazz come back into all of this? Well, apart from those two skills being fundamental to it, I'd kind of say that as soon as you can, I default towards searching for basic jazz piano tutorials rather than just the basic piano tutorials. And I think that that's because that they will waste a lot less of your time, because everything they do is going to be focused around getting to a point which is kind of like this. When LJ tried to learn guitar, obviously he had to start with some basic chords. 1, 2, 3. But since he likes slightly spicier chords, there was no way these were ever going to work in his music.
Alright, that sounds whack.
And I'm sure it made him feel like it was going to have to be years until he was actually able to play anything that he would use in his music. And I don't think it has to be that way. So what does my piano practice routine look like? This year it's comprised of 2 parts. So I've had the technique part and then I've had the songs part. The technique part I've taken from this one super long video by Piano with Johnny. It's been a godsend because I've just been able to work through all the 12 keys and get really good at the basics of jazz piano, if you can even call it that. The fact that it's focused on shell voicing 7th chords has been an absolute game changer because it means that I can actually use them in my music because they sound quite good. And the second part, which has been songs, I've basically been transcribing some basic jazz standards by ear and checking my transcription with people online. I thought it'd be a lot harder to, and it's been okay. I've been going alright so far. And then I've been practicing doing some improv over the sections which are built for improv. So yeah, this is a very niche video, but I've made it because if it can reach that one person who needs it most, it could be the absolute game changer that they need for their music. But maybe you've gotten to the end of this video and realized you don't actually need help with chords and melodies. You actually need to make your drums hit a bit better. If that's you, I've made a video on what I think is the biggest thing holding back beginner producers from making amazing drums. Just click it, I'll put it somewhere. Yeah. Nice. I want to one take this. That was the take. Let's go!